Hello, everyone. Welcome to our parent chat tonight. I'm so glad you're here. Those welcome slides were supposed to have music. Seemed like it stopped for some reason. Gotta love technology, but we're here. Everything else is working, which is way more important than the music on our slide. So this is our next to last parent chat of the year, and we are thrilled to have a really interesting topic tonight that we haven't covered before, and that is DBT. And we're going to be talking about how it can really help your kids and you, for that matter, go from just surviving to really thriving in life. And we have two wonderful people here from the Youth Eastside Services that is going to walk us through that. But I would really encourage you to ask questions, to make comments. So use the chat box for the questions. Put them in the Q&A box so they don't get lost, and we will get to those, we promise. If they pop into your head, just put them in. It doesn't interrupt us at all for you to put those in the Q&A box, and they can be anonymous. Like, we'll see your names, but nobody else will, and we won't say your name out loud, so that you can ask some more personal questions without worrying about revealing things to the general population. So we'll make sure we safeguard that for you. So let's get started. We have Cailyn, Griffith, and Eileen Scholtz who are joining us from Youth Eastside Services. And go ahead and come on screen, and I'm gonna hand over the mic to you. And yeah, let's just start with introduce yourselves and tell us like how long you've been doing what you're doing, and just give us a little bit of background.
All right. My name is Cailyn Griffith. I am a counselor working with Youth Eastside Services. I'm on their school-based team, and I've been on the school-based team for this is maybe my 6th year now. So I work entirely with Finn Hill Middle School, and I'm a co-occurring counselor. So I work school-based, I work with kids, I provide free services for them at their school, and there is someone like me in all of the comprehensive middle schools in this district. It's something that I think is really, really cool. And one of the fun things about my job is I get to do a whole bunch of different things, including presentations like these, to help educate folks about what options are out there, what kind of counseling services there are, things like that.
Excellent. I did not realize, Cailyn, that there are counselors in all of the schools, counselors
All
like
of the
you.
middle schools, and there's also someone who represents us in the high schools as well. We're not quite in the elementary schools just yet. Not
Nice.
all of us, anyway.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And hi, I'm Eileen. I've been working with Youth Eastside Services for a little less than a year now. I have been a counselor for the last 5+ years, working predominantly with like co-occurring services. So I work in the agency-based team, which means that I'm predominantly in our Bellevue office, also our Kirkland office, which is where I'm at right now, and working with teens who are either struggling with kind of high-risk behaviors or substance use, and kind of any sort of mental health symptoms that are going on. I've worked with DBT for a little while as well. And so what I really like is that it's like such a foundational tool to be able to help people kind of cope with some skills that they need. And it's really like can lay a really nice foundation. And so I found it to be really effective and useful. And that in
Excellent.
my time in Seattle.
Lovely. And I would love to ask for our attendees who are here, who knows what DBT is, who has either you've experienced it or you've read about it. Tell us a little bit so we know where to start, right? That we starting from the basics here, which is we're going to do anyway. We're going to talk about it, but it'd just be nice to know. All right. Okay. So go ahead. Let's talk about it. Let's get into DBT.
Yeah, all right. Well, I will go ahead and share my slides. And something helpful about these slides is they do say right off the bat what DBT actually stands for, because DBT is way easier to remember than this mouthful of a word, which is dialectical behavior therapy. It is the topic of tonight, and it's a really, really close to home kind of treatment for me. It's actually one of my first treatments that I ever learned in the world of counseling. So I also, like Eileen, I think it's really, really cool. And we'll get a little bit more into what it actually means in a couple of minutes. But first, I just want to give a little quick disclaimer about Youth Eastside Services in general for those of you that maybe haven't heard of us. But we are a community mental health agency that serves primarily folks on the east side in King County. So thinking Bellevue, the east side, Redmond, Sammamish, Kirkland. And we provide individual services to children and youth ages birth to 22. We have different programs for different ages and their families in East King County. And we really, really do focus on that young population, whether we're doing individual services, school-based services, group services, and then we have quite a few community programs as well. So our name is out there in various places. We have youth and family mental health counseling. That is the thing that most people will think of when they hear of us. But Eileen and I both happen to be co-occurring counselors. So we are also trained to work with substance abuse and those kinds of disorders as well. And then, like I said, we have community education and prevention programs. So quite a few different ways that youth might come to interact with us. And these are just some of our statistics from over the last year or so, but we reach quite a vast number of folks. We're really proud of the work that we do. We're really proud of improving access for young people to mental health care. Large part of that is being in the communities and being in these public schools too. So just some things to think about if you or a family member or a friend or a neighbor, anyone is kind of looking for that mental health support, that is what we are here for. All right. So DBT, again, that dialectical behavior therapy, those really, really big words, is a branch off cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is something that might be just a little bit more well known, but both of these treatments are ones that really, really focus on skill use. There is an impression when you come into the room with a counselor who works with DBT that you are equals with that person. Your client is going to be the expert on their life, their experiences, their circumstances, and the therapist is the one who has done the research, learned the skills, figured out how to teach them, and you work together to try and figure out how to best help each other and figure out what was going on. So these skills are really going to focus on 4 core modules. And Sherry, I see you there. Is there a question already?
Yeah, quick question.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the slide, it'll probably be a good time to answer it. What's the difference between CBT and DBT?
Yes. I will get to that at the end of the slide. I can clarify
Right.
that a little bit more. In DBT, we are always looking at these 4 core modules. They are the words that you will hear over and over and over again. They are really, really DBT broken down and simplified. But the 4 core modules, which we'll get into a couple other slides, are mindfulness, learning distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and then interpersonal effectiveness. So Marsha Linehan, who is the creator of DBT, found that these 4 things are really the targets that we want to focus on for improving someone's life. Oftentimes, treatment structure is pretty intense in a full DBT program, but we're looking at individual weekly therapy. So that client meets with an individual therapist once a week for about an hour. There is group skills learning, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It's about a 16-week course where a client will come and meet with other clients and potentially their families to learn all these skills that we're talking about. And there's a big ideology that every therapist that is on the DBT team is working as a team. All of our clients are each other's clients. We are there to support all of them. And then I included this in here. Unfortunately, this is not a feature that YES is capable of providing, but in true DBT, there is 24/7 phone coaching. So a client who's having a hard time outside of services can still reach a therapist or their therapist to receive some of that skills coaching in a moment where they really need it. So a big focus on meeting clients where they're at. There's a big focus on a balance between acceptance and change. So this kind of gets into that question around the differences between CBT and DBT. Cognitive behavioral therapy is very, very skills focused. It's very focused on having the client have the motivation to use the skills outside of their life, change their behavior, focus on the way that they're thinking, and adjust themselves essentially to notice what their mental health is and change into the world or change their skill use into the world. DBT is something that was created a little bit more with the understanding that that is a very frustrating thing to hear as a client. So Dr. Linehan, working with a lot of clients who had really high suicidal urges or high self-harm urgencies and frequencies, was noticing that a lot of clients would come to her and be like, hey, all these therapists want me to change. They want me to change. They want me to change. And I don't know if I can keep changing. So DBT has a little bit more of a lean back into acceptance as well and be like, hey, Sometimes it's your physiology. Sometimes it's the way that your brain works. Sometimes those automatic thoughts or those electrical signals that happen just are. What are ways that we can balance a little bit of acceptance of who you are, who your physiology made you to be, what your symptoms are like, and what are the moments where we can still also change some things? And it really is more about that collaboration between those two. Anything else that I missed in there, Eileen, that you can think of?
No, I think it's also one thing that kind of comes up a lot when I talk about group. I mean, of course, these questions can still come up, but like one of the kind of the main tenets of DBT is acknowledging that people are trying the best that they can, and then also as a group and as a team, kind of also saying, okay, well, what can we also do better, even though we know that we're doing the best that we can, which is really kind of emphasizing the dialectical model.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is a great lead in for this last question that I have on this slide is, what is dialectical thinking? What does this big word mean? So dialectics refer to opposites. So what Eileen literally just said, clients are doing the best that they can. Any given human on this planet is doing the best they can, and they can do better. So holding two things that feel like they ought to be opposites and realizing they can both be true at the same time. A really, really big skill of acceptance. Big example, one that usually hits home for a lot of people is maybe if you wake up early in the morning. I know I myself usually get up around 6:15. I am not a morning person. I do not like getting up in the morning, and I really love what I do. So I love getting up to go to work. Like I love that opportunity, and I can hold both of those emotions at the same time, even though they feel quite opposite from each other. So those dialectics, both balancing acceptance and change and the ways that so many of our emotions and our thoughts and our feelings pull us in different directions, and realizing, hey, there is a spot in the middle where we can dance back and forth a little bit, but there is some flexibility inherent in those things.
And Cailyn, someone was curious if this would be beneficial to those who are neurodiverse or autistic. It sounds like from what you're describing, I would say the answer is yes.
I'm a big believer that DBT can be helpful for everyone, including those folks that do not have any mental health conditions.
Mhm.
I think the core of this is like it's what's called a skills deficit model. So it simply is looking at an individual who has not had the life experiences or the specific instruction to learn the skills that we're talking about. And it's not necessarily a disease model. It's not looking at there's something wrong with you that you haven't learned these things. It's like, you're a person. Let's talk about skills. So I think there are definitely ways to make this really accessible for folks who are neurodivergent. And all of these skills, I think are ones that can be taught in different ways, and can be implemented in different ways. We'll get to a slide later. It's a diary card that shows a good number of the skills in DBT. And there's also a thing where it's like, not all the skills are going to work for you, but it's kind of like throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks. So there are enough to go around depending on what works best for you. All right. So this whole thing, Sherry had come to us and asked about a web series that we had created. It's called the Building a Life Worth Living web series. And I'll show you guys that a little bit later when we get to the very end of our presentation, just so you know how to access it. So I created this presentation thinking less about trying to give you guys all of the skills that are in DBT because they're published somewhere else, and more around giving you guys the heart of why these components are put together. But at the bottoms of these slides, I do have a little icon that shows you where in that toolbox or Building a Life Worth Living web series things fit. And it was based on this metaphor of like how to build a house. So first we're starting with building a foundation, then establishing a shelter, then finishing your home, and then interacting with your community. So mindfulness comes first because it really is the foundation for everything that comes along with DBT. And mindfulness is one of the things that, at least I don't know if Eileen, you would agree with this, is the hardest thing to get clients on board with a lot of the time, because it is so simple and it's very difficult. It is one of those lovely things. Another dialectic there. But the point of mindfulness is really just awareness. So it's not meditation. It's not sitting there and clearing your brain completely. It is about the practice of trying to do that, of just noticing what things come along, what things enter your mind, noticing that those thoughts are not the same thing as the action urges that come from our thoughts. They're not the same thing as our feelings. They are just sticks and rocks and leaves that are in the river flowing past us. One of my favorite ways to teach about mindfulness initially is an image that I hope is familiar to most of you, but would be Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin sitting on top of the bridge, watching leaves float by the river. Our mind is the river, and the leaves, whatever they look like, if they're spinning, what colors they are, those are the thoughts, those are the feelings, those are the urges that we have to interact with our world. They are not the same thing as us. And we ultimately have power over those things. We can pick and choose what things to respond to. So I heard a quote once that said that freedom is the space between when you have a cue in your environment and when you respond to it. So mindfulness is all about just building that space, stretching it out a little bit more so that a person can choose to respond to something that happens to them rather than just react to it. It is, again, it is the key for all skills, because if you are not able to recognize those action urges or those thoughts or those feelings as they're happening, then how are you going to use the skills? So it really is just about slowing down, paying attention to what's going on, and really getting to know yourself really well. It is definitely not always about relaxation. There are plenty of mindfulness games that we do in all of our groups that are not relaxing. So it really is whatever that awareness is, no matter where the energy level is.
Cailyn, there's a question that fits wonderfully here.
Yeah.
Any tips or hints for how to build interest in mindfulness? Hard to demonstrate value in these practices and mindsets to our students.
Yeah. I would say one of the the games that we get that has one of the most buy-in, I don't know if Eileen, you agree with this or not, is called alien eating. Kids love eating. They love if you give them a piece of candy. I personally like using high chews because I think they're a little bit interesting. But alien eating is all about getting in touch with your sensations. So you give someone a piece of candy, and before they're allowed to open it, you ask them to close their eyes and feel what the wrapper feels like. You ask them to see what it sounds like. Does it make noise if you shake it? You let them open it up. Again, do those sensations change at all? What do you notice? Can you smell it? Is it something that, like, hopefully you wash your hands first, but is it something that like squishes a little bit when you have your hands on it, or is it something that doesn't? What does it taste like when you put it in your mouth? Does flavor change? Can you still smell it? So working with any skill that really requires your sensations to be aware of is a really good starting point, because it is that easy. There are other things like sound ball games or things like that. That's personally not one of my favorites. I don't like making weird sounds in front of large groups of other people. And that one's all about like, what does it feel like to participate and throw your all into something? So it requires you like taking an imaginary ball, making a sound and sending it to another kid. And that kid has to make that same sound, make another random sound and send it on. And there's this chain reaction that happens. And we ask clients to just fully commit to those things. I think this is something that is really great for like drama kids too, a lot of the time. Yeah. Any other like favorite mindfulness things, Eileen?
Yeah, I was gonna say that goes over really well. Food is always a win. I think that one way to kind of always really help in the buy-in is really distinguishing the difference between mindfulness and meditation. A lot of times those two things feel like they're integrated together. And they're not necessarily. And a lot of times people are practicing mindfulness without actually realizing that they're doing it. And so sometimes it's about getting a little curious and exploring maybe areas where somebody is being mindful and just acknowledging that, and sometimes starting from that point. One, it becomes a lot less scary to do because they're already engaged in it. And two, it's like there's already some kind of power in knowing that it can be done. Music is also really helpful. Yeah, kind of getting into any of the senses and acknowledging that is usually a kind of a nice place to start. A quiet mindfulness is not necessarily always like the most comfortable place to start. So we always kind of recommend like thinking outside or doing artwork or something that's involving maybe some movement or that kind of thing as well. So those tends to be a little bit more apt for a buy-in for sure. I
Yeah,
always like music ones.
yeah, one thing that I've noticed of my clients right now is that because they're on their phones and devices so much, the idea of stopping and listening to their thoughts is really kind of creates a lot of anxiety for them. So I feel like we got to kind of ease them into it. Like you said, you've got a piece of candy, not the thoughts that you're focusing on, not yet anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's something interesting too about mindfulness, and it requires like that attention span thing too, right? So I myself, I am super guilty of turning on the TV, and then a few minutes later, I'll find myself scrolling through my phone, right? And even thinking about one of the quieter skills for mindfulness, it really is sitting there and focusing on something. And whenever you notice your attention drifting away, non-judgmentally and very kindly, just turn your attention back to the thing that you were supposed to be focusing on. So part of it too is about like building that long-term ability to pay attention to something, which is really interesting. Yeah. All right, so moving on from building our foundation, the next group of skills would be under distress tolerance. The point of this is because a lot of folks who might be seeking out DBT, it was created for folks who have really, really high emotions. Dr. Linehan was looking for a treatment that would be really impactful and helpful for folks who experience pretty high suicidal urges. So she noticed that the population she was working with tended to have really, really strong emotions, ones that bowled them over and really felt like they took over everything. So mindfulness creates the awareness of the emotions, but then once we're super aware of those big emotions, because one of the first skills that lots of teens that I work with know how to do is ignore, which can be a skill. It can be very helpful to shut down your emotions, not pay attention to them, put them away for another time. And sometimes that gets to a point where it's no longer helpful. So when we feel those emotions, the best way out is through a lot of the time. So what are the skills that we can use to weather the storm, to keep going through that really, really hard emotion and come out the other side without acting on those impulses that maybe are less healthy for us? So the important, really big things in here are crisis survival skills. How can we get through that emotion? Realizing that those big emotions can get in the way of us choosing something in a more rational sense. So even if we know what our coping mechanisms are in a moment where we're feeling calm, big emotions can super just blow that out of the water. And then some emotions can sometimes overshadow others. So like anger is a great example of that. When we feel angry, there's often a lot more going on beneath the surface than just that one emotion. So learning about your emotions, learning why that's the case and why we lump onto these specific emotions first, and really, again, doing that mindfulness to explore what's beneath that. So we can listen to what we really need or what our emotions need us to do. Because at the end of the day, our emotions are just information about our world. It's the way our body has learned to take in information and communicate it to us. All right. Then we've got finishing your home. So what are the things once we've learned to withstand the distress, once we've learned to be aware of the things that are going on, emotion regulation is kind of that coping ahead. It's how can we do maintenance in the rest of the time? What are the little details that we can put on things? What are the routines that we can establish that we know are going to be beneficial for us? And when we can predict that some days are just going to be tougher than others, what are things that we can do for ourselves to get through that? So the point is that some strong or uncomfortable emotions can be diluted and managed through skill use, and they're still very important to feel. So we're not taking ourselves out of the situations that maybe bring those emotions, and we're figuring out how we can stay in those moments. Again, emotions are simply information. They're not commands. They do not dictate the way that we act. We can choose to notice what emotions we're feeling and choose to do something different sometimes, depending on what's going to be the most helpful for us. All of our emotions are valid. There's a strong, strong piece of validation in DBT, though sometimes our emotions also don't quite fit the facts. So how can we recognize what the emotions are telling us and make space for the other information that might be out there? And then coping ahead is something that will just build resiliency in general, something that's really helpful for a lot of folks. With this emotion or this category in particular, I like to remind folks that, again, as a skills deficit model, we're thinking you're just an individual that hasn't learned the skills yet. I also like to remind folks that they come into this having learned some skills. Oftentimes, this is one where I'm like, you're already doing these things. It's just this is the name we're going to give you for it. So reinforcing for folks, hey, your behavior is already skillful. You already have a clue and how to do these things. We just need to generalize it so you can use it in other times or other important areas, so that they can feel a little bit more confident and realize, hey, my behavior is skillful. I am doing something right with these. All right, and then our very last module is interpersonal effectiveness. Humans are social creatures. We need to interact with other people to be our best selves, right? Like that is a human need that we have. And there are more effective and less effective ways to interact with other people. So we've got our perspective taking skills, we've got our maintaining self-respect. A lot of my clients tend to be over apologizers. So when is that actually helpful for you versus when do we maybe need to work on like thanking people for their patience instead? Or maybe there are times where you're apologizing where you're not the one who's supposed to be apologizing. There are skills in here for like asking for the things that you want in a way that is more likely to get you what you want. So maybe you shouldn't approach mom in a moment where she's had a really tough day at work and she's just got to get all the chores done. But maybe in a moment where she's just kind of hanging out, she's on her phone, she's having a good time. What are the ways that we can notice how other people in our environment are doing and interact with them most effectively to build our relationships so they're still healthy? Maybe cut off those relationships that aren't healthy for us and we know kind of lead to worse things, and get the things that we need in those interactions with other people. All right. So with all of those modules in mind, this is a sneak preview at a whole host of diary cards. There is an idea in dialectical behavior therapy that if you can get a client to fill out a diary card every single day, which is simply going through this list and checking off every day all the skills that they used, that will unlock all the rest of treatment. And I kind of believe it. I'm not going to lie. Because again, these skills aren't that hard. Once you know what all these words mean, they're like, okay, I can see the ways that I've actually interacted with these and used these in my daily life. And it builds the awareness of using those skills, which builds that confidence. And if they're using the skills, then they can remember to use the skills. They're acknowledging the times that they have implemented those skills, which then our brain takes as really positive information. And then when we have opportunities to use our skills in the future, it's a little bit easier to grab. It's a little bit more of a shortcut that's built. So this is a sneak preview. We don't have time to go into all of these, but the Building a Life Worth Living webinar does hit on quite a few of these. But this is just an idea to build of, again, kind of throwing that spaghetti at a wall. Not all of these are going to work for every single person out there. They're not going to be everyone's favorites. And there are going to be some in here in each of these modules that are really great, that a lot of people will find are really helpful for them.
Yeah, there's a bonus here that whenever you check something off a list, it gives you a dopamine hit. So I'm looking at this list and like every day they would have an opportunity to just get that dopamine hit as they're learning and becoming aware. This is a mindfulness skill just right here, looking
Yeah.
through the list, right?
100% is, yeah. And anyone who likes to-do lists, or if you are the kind of person that makes a to-do list and the first thing on there is to make a to-do list so you can check it right off, these are things that work for you.
Love it.
Also want to
And
emphasize that this skills card is really good with stickers as well.
Yes.
So if we want like an additional dopamine hit, then stickers really are a really big motivator for
love
checking
that.
things off this list.
Yeah, and you're
Stickers are
never
a
too
fun
old for
currency.
stickers, right?
You're never
They
too
work
old
on
for
all
stickers.
ages.
Yes, I can guarantee that. Yeah.
Yes. I was at a conference one time and they gave us stickers for something and I felt so giddy. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. We have a question here. What age
Yes.
group do you find engagement at this level with a skills card is effective? Our fifth grader really resists activities like this. Pointless and boring is what the fifth grader would say.
Yeah. Absolutely. So like I said, this is an example of a diary card. This is actually, it's not a worksheet or an Excel, like a PDF or anything like that. This is an Excel document that we have in our system because you can customize it. So you can take things off, you can add emojis, you can add the skills that are the most interesting to that person. If you Google a DBT diary card, there are so many different kinds. There are people on Etsy who create cute ones that they've made in Canva, and they have way better skills than I do with design. But part of doing DBT with a client is getting them to use the diary card, right? That's a huge goal of treatment because it's something that unlocks a lot of skill use. And in that sense, it matters if it's likely for the client to use it. So we don't want it to be boring. It doesn't have to look like this. But picking out the skills that they've decided they really like, let's track 2 or 3 to start with. Let's build that habit slowly. What are the mindfulness skills that really work for you? What's another name for the skill that works for you? We can make it really short so it fits on a sticky note. We can start with just tracking emotions. So it really can develop as we build the skills, and it can be 100% customized to whatever works for that person.
A couple of people are asking if this list is going to be shared. Is this part of what they can access? You're going to show us in a bit how to access things. Is it part of that?
This is not specifically on what I'm going to show you that's on the website. There is not a diary card that was part of the DBT skills webinar. But again, something like this, very easily Googleable. This is the one that I happen to have saved in my drive because it's just from my agency. But there are ones that are out there from like the DBT website and things like that that are free and accessible.
So they Google DBT diary card.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm
should
gonna
be
put
able
that
to.
in the
That's what
chat.
I've done for clients.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right, so this is where I will just share a little tiny bit more about the Building a Life Worth Living webinar series. And then at the end of my slides, I was going to go ahead and unshare the slides and show y'all like how to navigate to that webpage so you can find it pretty easily. But it was based on a DBT Steps A curriculum, which is a textbook that was created for DBT. It is a group curriculum that was created for teachers and school counselors to be able to implement in schools. So it is made to be used with students and is created by James Mazza and Elizabeth Dexter Mazza. They also did quite a few of their own webinars that are posted on YouTube, I believe, throughout COVID, where they were teaching DBT skills to their children. So these two are like big names in the DBT world. They definitely know what they're talking about. But me and a colleague, Delaney Not Nearest, who's no longer with YES, came together and we wanted to run a DBT Steps A group during COVID. We were having a lot of trouble recruiting folks. So instead we decided, let's just do a webinar instead. So we distilled down, I believe the DBT Steps A curriculum is something like 30 groups. So we distilled things down, combined some skills here and there, and came out with a 16 episode series. One came out every week, introducing DBT skills in each of those 4 core categories. So there are 4 videos per each skill group, and they go into 1 or 2 different skills in each of those. So you can mix and match if you would like to. We also, along with that webinar, they're about an hour long each, maybe between 30 minutes to 60 minutes. But they each come along with a worksheet. So for those of you that have a hard time just like watching someone on a screen for an hour, I understand that. So we created a worksheet that's designed for you to go through it as you watch the video so you can fill things out, apply that knowledge, and see if you understand what's going on.
Is this designed for the kids or for the adults?
All of the above. We were imagining at that time that parents and kids would be the largest majority, like folks watching it together. I do think because Delaney and I were both very used to working with kids, middle schoolers were our population, that naturally we kind of guided it to be accessible towards middle schoolers around that age. But we've definitely had adults. We had some school counselors join us, but adults can absolutely access that material too. All right. And again, I can get to showing you guys how to access that at the very end. It's a very orange slide. Anyway.
Wake us up.
Yeah. So I am going to talk about the DBT program that we have at Eastside Services. I'm facilitating that with another one of our counselors there, and this group is actually, it's a lot of fun, so I'm happy to talk about it. So feel free to ask any questions about if there's anything that feels like I'm not covering it. And please, Cailyn, of course, jump in too. But it's a multifamily skills group. It goes for 24 weeks, and then practicing skills. And so a lot of times what that looks like is that we either have parents come with their kiddos. Sometimes it's both parents, sometimes it's one parent. And then sometimes it's just parents at some point, kind of depending on whether or not the kiddo is willing to come. And so it's one of those things that we think really can help benefit all families. And so any way that we can integrate kind of families into learning these skills and bringing them home, we think is also really beneficial. And so parents, they practice the skills at the same times their kids are. And so a couple things that does that's really nice is everybody's held accountable in the same way, and also kind of can get to see how these skills can be used and get support from other teenagers or from other parents. And so there's always two facilitators in each group. That's definitely by design. There's usually one that's kind of organizing the group itself, and then the other facilitator is also kind of supporting that role and also supporting each one of the clients or one of the parents. So everybody that is facilitating is also trained in DBT skills as well. So and so yeah, and it's every week, and it's usually about 2 hours. And so a couple things that we also really kind of want to hold to fidelity to some degree too is making sure that any kiddo that's in DBT is also assigned with a DBT therapist at the same time, so they're able to talk about the skills that they're either utilizing. And it is a skills group. So the intention is to be learning some of the skills and learning ways that they can be used. But as we all know, as we talk about some of those things, sometimes we can get activated. So either a parent can get activated or a kiddo can get activated. And so the group is really kind of set up in order to make that time for the learning and bringing back some of the things that were maybe distressing, and talk about some of these skills and how to use them, and maybe it's hard about using some of these skills in individual therapy. So there's just other ways that they can be supported in it. And then so as far as like the referral process is concerned with getting into this program, is that it's one of those things that it's kind of a case-by-case basis. The therapists themselves would maybe say, like, I think that this might be a good fit, either talking to the parent or talking to the kid about it. Some kiddos are like, absolutely not, I don't want to do groups. And the other thing though is that, but sometimes there's some parents who are like, I could see this really being helpful. And if I could do this group, if my child is able to work on it, maybe individually, like even that could be helpful. Obviously, we think that if everyone's in the room, there's so much that can happen with social learning. So we really do believe that that is the best model. But we also understand that there's lots of different schedules and lots of different situations that come up. It can be demanding. It's 2 hours at the end of a Monday every week, and a lot of people are busy, and there's traffic and all of that, but we try to be as supportive as we can. But it is a time commitment, and we do ask that if anybody starts the program, that they go through all of the modules. And so if you were getting introduced to the model, then what would happen is that you would go to 2 weeks of learning more about mindfulness, because it is the foundational tenet of DBT, and learning about why we do it. And then would go into whatever the next module is. And so we spend some time just working on the distress tolerance, or just working on the interpersonal effectiveness. And then so as far as the way that the actual class, or the way that the actual group goes, is that we always do a check-in first. We always kind of make sure that everybody knows everyone's name. Also, we always check in for anxiety and presence. One of the reasons is that really kind of also helps like developing some of that mindfulness in itself, like knowing how you feel in that moment. We check in that way. And then just a little bit of like kind of what skills you use. It could be the skill that was worked on the week before. It also could be any of the skills that feels like it's needed that week. And so sharing that. And so everybody's sharing like the ways in which they're able to use these skills in lots of different ways. And then we do a mindfulness practice afterwards all together, go over homework, take a break because it's 2 hours. We do not expect everybody to stay in the room the whole time without any breaks. So then we take a little break and then come back and learn a new skill and then do checkout. There is snacks. We do know that teens are hungry, and the snacks are very popular. We really encourage people to take some agency and autonomy in the group to take care of what they need to in the moment, and also come back and be ready to kind of work on what the topic is. And as far as the diary cards are concerned, sometimes we do the diary cards, we make sure that they're known. It would really be a case-by-case basis depending on the individual therapy. We in group don't check up on those cards, but some individual clinicians really utilize those because it helps to track what is working for our clients, and also sometimes bringing that back into the family, into like the family system group and talking about it that way. But they're always kind of nice things to have, and then it helps you kind of track.
Eileen, somebody is saying that their son has been at YES for 2.5 years and has never heard of this program. So is there, you mentioned a therapist might refer in or something. Is that why, or is there something else?
As far as the exact reason why, I would say it would be hard for me to say without maybe knowing a little bit more context. So a lot of times, like, Cailyn was saying earlier, that a lot of DBT skills are useful for anybody, which is what we really like for the family. But at the same time, there is a little bit sometimes of a mindset because it was initially kind of created for really high risk behaviors and being able to handle really like easy dysregulation or really high risk behaviors in the moment, and being able to kind of find ways to kind of manage and cope with those. And so sometimes it's a level of risk. Also, sometimes it is maybe that the individual therapist doesn't know that maybe some of these things are happening. I mean, sometimes we're not really aware of what maybe is going on at home, what behaviors are showing up. And so it is something that definitely we've had a lot more kind of a lot more referrals and acceptance rates into the program in I would say probably the last 6 months or so, was just really trying to educate people at intake and like letting them know that it's available, especially if some of these distress tolerances would be really helpful. Also, if a child was saying, I'm not interested, then it's one of those things that it usually is kind of up to the clinician to say like, well, it depends on the relationship that they have with the parent as to whether or not they could recommend it. For example, I work with 13 and up. And so if my services are confidential, I can't actually even contact the parents. And so it really kind of is a case-by-case basis, but we are finding that more people are wanting some of these skills and really wanting to engage in it. And so we're seeing a little bit more popularity with this group for sure.
And then if the teen is not interested, can the parents join on their own?
So that is one of those situations that it would depend. So we would talk with Liz, is the one that is she's not here this week, but she's the one that would organize that. And I would say we have had some parents do that. We tried to at least have one of the kids come into the initial first couple groups to like know what's going on, because realistically, in order for that referral to come in, they have to be willing to work on some of these skills, even if it's an individual. Because we really find that it's when parents and teens are working on the skills together, and at least are doing that, whether or not it's at home, they're mostly working on it, or they're doing it in group together, is when it's more effective. And so there has to be some awareness that the teen is engaged in when it comes to these skills. Otherwise, it becomes the parent coming home with these skills and their teen not necessarily understanding where the skills are coming from. And so it does help for them to at least be doing an individual therapy and aware of what those skills are. Any other questions? Okay. So that's a great question. I'm sorry, I just looked at the questions. Is there a group specifically for kids on the spectrum? There is not specifically a group set aside for kids on the spectrum. It is something that we've talked about and kind of thought about trying to implement, given like the right amount of referrals and resources to support that. We definitely work with all teens with where they're at. So we really do believe that anybody can benefit from utilizing these skills. And so always trying to be aware of how to integrate that into the program, but not specifically set aside. We really like to take people where they're at, and sometimes that creates like a more kind of diverse group. But we have had kids on the spectrum in the group for sure. Okay.
All right. Any other questions on group that folks are seeing?
I think that's it for now.
Yeah, cool. So, Sherry, when we were creating this website, you said that it would be helpful for some folks to have some takeaways or some skills to try, is how I interpreted that. So some of the things that I notice, like, because we have clinicians going through the DBT training all of the time. So some of the things that I notice, like, you can kind of clue into who has been doing it recently based on the way they change their language and things like that. The biggest one for me is changing away from but language. And the way to get teens hooked on this is to call it the but eraser. They love that. Funny jokes and all that. But if you've ever noticed that, like, when you use the term but in a sentence, it tends to erase everything that came before it. And we really want to move into that dialectical thinking. So if you notice, whenever you use the term but, you can usually replace it with either both or and in a sentence, and it will still make sense. It might be a little bit of a challenge sometimes in group. You definitely get kids who are like, I'm going to come up with a phrase that it won't make sense. But very, very often you can hold both of those opposites together. And it helps with increasing that, like, kind of that peace with those opposites together and a little bit less of that conflict that comes along with that. Radical acceptance, I put on there because it's one of my favorite skills. Again, one of those ones that's super, super, super simple and very, very difficult. It's all about acceptance is not the same thing as approval. You don't have to like that something is going on, but until we can learn to accept the circumstances that we have, we cannot do anything with them. So radical acceptance is kind of using that mindfulness and a little bit of that emotion regulation, sitting there and being like, okay, I accept that this is what's going on. You can still have your feelings about it. You can still have your thoughts about it and everything like that. And based on what you were going to use, again, thinking about Winnie the Pooh, Christopher Robin, on top of that bridge, acceptance is what we're going to work on. We're going to work on being like, okay, these are the tools that I have to work with. These are the supplies that I have. And here's how we're going to keep going. That's the only way to keep going in a lot of cases. I can't stress using mindfulness enough. It is the foundation. It is the thing that you need to make all of the rest of these things fall into place. And self-validation. Telling yourself that it is okay to feel the way you feel, telling other people it's okay, or you see why they would feel the way they feel. Again, it's not necessarily the same thing as saying you would feel the same way if you were in their shoes. It's not the same thing as saying that you approve of it, but all feelings are valid. And if you can start the process of validating yourself, not second guessing your own emotions, letting yourself have your emotions and just letting yourself sit with them, those are all really, really big things to start doing for yourselves that are definitely very DBT themed. Other perspectives that I think are really important are, this is again a skills deficit model. You have the capacity to build these skills. And if you don't know them already, you either just have not learned them by this name, or they just simply haven't been introduced to you yet. And it's something to grow, something to learn with. And these skills are appropriate for everyone. Some of that radical acceptance comes in when we're thinking in particular about interpersonal effectiveness. Others might choose not to use those skills, or others might not have those skills, and you can always use them. They're always going to be something that you can fall back on, can be in your toolbox, can be implemented in your life, and ideally, they will work together to help with whatever situation you may find yourself in.
I think these, from a parenting perspective, I think radical acceptance is really important. If our kids are struggling or failing school or school refusal or they're clinically depressed, that we can just accept, not loving the situation, but we can accept where we are, where our kids are. And then that's when you can really kick into that mindfulness and validation, everything else. I think you got to just start like, this is where we are. And what are we gonna do?
It's acknowledging reality.
Yeah.
Because if we're in denial all the time, we spend a lot of time pushing things away and not enough time taking a look at what we've got to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
By the way, we've got some votes here for a group specifically for those on the spectrum. So just so you
I
know,
would love
some
it.
data for
I
you.
mean, I think that would be lovely. All right. So some ways to reach out to us. We are obviously, this is a slide that was created in COVID, but we are currently offering virtual services. That was somewhat new in 2020, but we continue to have telehealth. Our groups are run in person. I don't believe those have ever made the switch on to telehealth. That is our main number. You're welcome to call us if you want to inquire about services. There are various social medias. And then the last slide that I have on here is like thank you and questions. I am going to skip that real quick just to share with y'all the way to navigate to the Building a Life Worth Living web series instead, because I think that is helpful just for navigation purposes, so you know where to find this resource I keep referencing. But if we were to just go to our website, youtheastsideservices.org, if you wanted to, you could throw in here just a /tool, Youth Eastside services.org /toolbox. That is our little nickname for this webinar series. Oh, and it didn't like that. Try that. Well, it didn't like that, so we're
I
gonna
think
go
you're
back.
missing a word in there. There we go. Try that now because you
East.
didn't have side on there.
Oh, it didn't?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Try that one more time.
Aha, it
There we
wanted
go.
to work for me. So this lovely little banner that says Building a Life Worth Living web series is the sign that you're in the right place. But in case you don't remember that, because Toolbox is not the actual name of this series, going back to the web page, if you go to our services right here in the middle, and then go down to DBT or Dialectical Behavior Therapy, there is some more of that same information that we've been going through about what the 4 skills are, what our DBT program looks like, individual therapy skills group, and then DBT web series. So here's this orange little button that brings us right back to the same place. And you've got these same icons that I had on our slides. Each of these will have the introduction for what each skill is in each of these videos, the handout that's linked here, the slides, if you are interested in those, and then the video, which is just linked on YouTube. So you can stay on this web page to watch them, or you can go to YouTube to find them. You can pick and choose if you would like. And again, if you are a learner that likes having a little bit of that interaction, some of the handouts that are on here are just editable PDFs. So you can write in your answers. You can work on them as a family. You can work on them in a different place with your teen and have them tell you what some of their answers are. There are some prompts in there that are meant to be a little bit more thoughtful, and there's some in there that are just given to you if you watch the episode. Yes, that is all we had. So if there are any other outstanding questions or things like that, I think Eileen and I would love to take those.
Yeah, if you have any questions, again, you can put them in the Q&A box if you want it to be really anonymous. You can also put it in the chat box for us. This is a lot of really great information. And I just want to say I am so thankful that YES is in our community and providing so much support, because we all know our kids need it right now. And we as parents, we need it too. You know, we're all in this together. So somebody is asking about prices on things.
I can talk through that. So it's as far as the prices are concerned, it's something that you would want to, I would call the front desk and ask them, because everybody, like I said, has an individual therapist, so they would be enrolled in services. And so it's something that usually insurance would cover. It's not like a drop-in. It's something that the referral happens through one of the individual therapists, either at time of intake or once they get assigned a therapist, and then it would be billed to insurance or it would be billed individually. So yeah, they're not free courses, and I apologize, I don't know what those would be if you were paying out of pocket. I could find that answer for you and provide it back to you, Sherry, but yeah, usually it's all billed by insurance.
Okay. And then what you were showing us, though, as far as the website, that is all free. So that's a great place to start.
That is just out there. Yeah, all of it.
Yeah, for you as a parent, maybe you can get your kids to watch it behind your back. Like you just happen to be watching it in the kitchen. Get them to get interested. Someone saying they hadn't heard of YES before, and their boys are 19. So, well, I'm glad you've heard about it now. And YES has it's been this gradual of getting more and more into the schools as society became aware we needed that. So that may be one reason also with 19-year-olds that you hadn't heard of it. But we're getting the word out there.
One thing to say is you're not too late to the party. We take youth up to 22. And so, like I said, I work with teenagers, and I've worked with clients that were up to the age of 21, 22. So if they're wanting to enroll in services, we're still a resource.
Excellent. And what about a DBT group for that age group?
That would be okay, yeah.
Excellent. Oh, well, that's good to know. So you're not too late. I like it. Even though you're notoriously late for the party, you say, not in this instance.
Yeah.
Good to know. All righty. Okay, so what we will do is we're going to send out after this, as we always do, links to this, links, some of the stuff that was said, so that all of you who are here, you can watch it again if you want, but also feel free to share it with other people. The recording will be up on YouTube with all of the rest of our Balance in Mind parent chats that are up there. So yeah, share it so that people know about this resource. Like Donna, who was saying hadn't heard of it. Well, now we can make sure we do our part to get the word out that this resource is around. And before we hop off, there is one last question. Do siblings end up in the same group, or is it best if they're separated if they're twins?
I'm going to be perfectly honest. I have never had that situation happen. So I am not sure, to be honest. We haven't had twins enrolled before.
Yeah.
I would assume it would depend on how well they interact with each other. It might be that if there's one that has some behaviors that are a little bit bigger, a little bit more present right now, we might put that student or that client in a little bit beforehand. Occasionally run groups, but they're often in different locations and on different nights. So there's not often a same group happening in the same building at the same time. So it depends on what's going on. If they do best separated, then it might be that we take one and the other one works individually, and then the next round of group after that other twin has taken out, then the new twin would come in. So it would be something to explore. But yeah, I've also not been in that situation either. So
and I think the dynamics between the twins is very important, and you'd have to ask each of them separately, because one of them might be like, no, I'm only want to do it with my twin. The other like, no, I need my space. So just depends on the twins. Everyone has their own personalities. So
yeah, we've been getting a lot more popularity on the group too. So there may be a potential that there's two groups running at the same time.
Okay.
That has not happened yet, but there is a little bit of like some talk about whether or not that would be something that could work, kind of getting to summer or for fall next year. So
basically reach out to YES and ask these questions, and make the choices best for your kids. Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you to both of you. I really appreciate you being here. For those of you who are in attendance, if you could pop something in the chat box before we end for the night, just saying a thanks or something that stood out for you, something that you learned. That's always helpful for us to see. And if you know how to do reactions at the bottom, we can give some claps or hearts or something to Cailyn and Eileen just to say thank you. This was a really great parent chat. I really appreciate both of you taking your time. I know you have a full plate seeing, kids and helping people in the community. So I do really appreciate you spending your time with us tonight. And you can read the chat as we go out here. And thanks to everyone. Have a great night, and look into this course online. Looks like a lot of great information. Good night, everyone.